It is time for First Nation chiefs to come together and solve the problem of providing clean water for all First Nations people in Ontario and Canada. For the first time ever, everyone agrees. Right now in Ontario, there is an alignment of visions between governments. From this alignment comes a promise to end boil water advisories in 5 years for all First Nations in Canada. This promise has created an unprecedented opportunity for First Nations here in Ontario. Together, we can fulfill the promise. With only 4 years left in this government's mandate, the time to act is now. The place to act is at the First Nations Water Crisis Summit and Symposium, October 17th to 19th, 2016 in Niagara Falls, Ontario. As part of this year's Water Symposium, the OFNTSC is hosting a special Chiefs Summit. This historic meeting will focus on finding a way to ensure this most important government promise is kept. If we are to solve the problem of boil water advisories across Ontario, a First Nations-led approach is needed, a solution for First Nations by First Nations. This solution must represent one voice for all First Nations communities and organizations, be a streamlined approach for government and First Nations, respect the current roles of communities, tribal councils, and treaty organizations in the process, and maximize First Nation employment opportunities at every level. First Nations have the experience and capability to lead and deliver a province-wide solution. They need to be given the authority, responsibility, and budget to lead the process. There are currently 2 obstacles to making this happen. First, both the government and First Nations do not have clear direction as to whom to contact for leadership and support. What is needed is a single point of contact. Secondly, under the current system, individual First Nations are left to negotiate with the government on water issues. This results in strong First Nations moving forward, while those that are not adequately resourced are left behind. This proposed approach will turn this series of inefficient micro-projects into a well-organized, all-inclusive mega-project, ensuring that no First Nation is left behind. Who will lead this mega-project? There are really only 2 options. Under a private sector-led approach, the private sector companies that are hired will gain the benefits from the project. When, as in the past, the private sector has control of projects, there are only minimal benefits to First Nations, including tribal councils and communities. Under this process, First Nations do not take on a leadership role. They do not gain new knowledge or capacity, and the process does not contribute to growth. Utilizing a First Nations-led approach, First Nations can take charge of the process. We can have the private sector work for us and ensure that the process reflects the belief systems and values that are important to First Nations. With a First Nation-led approach, First Nations gain the benefits and build the capacity necessary to continue to operate our water systems well into the future. Under this process, First Nations provide the leadership and not only receive the immediate benefits, but also develop their own knowledge and experience base over the long term. The difference between these 2 approaches is essentially the redistribution of responsibility, control, and authority over the project to a First Nation-led approach. In the end, First Nations are the ones destined to drink the water, and are the ones who have had to try to manage third-party solutions to water and wastewater systems in their communities. It stands to reason then that they must be intimately involved in a solution at the highest level. The organizational chart shows how, by adding a tier of provincial First Nation leadership and oversight in the form of a water authority, First Nations gain valuable control and long-term experience from the implementation of the process. Tribal councils become operating authorities, while communities benefit from the day-to-day operations of the water plant itself. Each tier supports the other, creating a holistic, self-sustained approach to water management in First Nations communities. At this year's First Nation Water Crisis Summit and Symposium, chiefs will discuss the First Nation-led approach. First Nation chiefs are the only ones that can direct the process of changing the relationship between First Nations and government. Our goal is to make water clean for all First Nations. A band council resolution is being provided to all chiefs in support of this approach. With a unified consensus, we will position Ontario First Nations as leaders in the crafting of a First Nation-led approach to ending boil water advisories in Canada. We need every Ontario chief to be at the First Nation Water Crisis Summit and Symposium, October 17th to 19th, 2016 in Niagara Falls, Ontario, to make a historic decision and provide clean drinking water for all. If we are going to realize this vision of solving all boil water advisories within 5 years, we need everyone to attend this most historic Chiefs meeting.